Speaking of action now, we will kick off this day by bringing together Nordic experts and researchers and policymakers. And we will discuss the latest research on policy recommendation. And I want to welcome up, you are standing here ready to go, Marcus Larsson from the Royal Institute of Technology. I know you have a gift here from Romina. Yes, give him a hand over.
Thank you, and thank you, Romina. And please accept this report. It's brand new.
Very
you have
good.
the first copy. We hope you find it useful, and perhaps it will make your work a bit easier.
Very good. Thank you so much for this. And hopefully you might listen to the scientists at least. So that will be good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Romina. Thank you so much. And Marcus, you were going to give us a little bit of a hint here. You have this little clicker there about what you just handed to Romina. I think you will explain, right?
I will.
Perfect. Use the share and take it away here.
The first copy of a report.
Perfect. Just
I continue, Åsa.
yeah, continue on and let's see if that's it. There you go.
Of this report. Policy options for reducing consumption-based emissions, a Nordic survey. It's published by the Nordic Council of Ministers today. Me and colleagues are presenting and analyzing some 100 policies targeting consumption-based emissions in the Nordic countries. Two of my co-authors, Göran Finnveden, Eskil Engström, please raise your hands. They didn't accept to this, but I think they want to talk to you in the coffee break. Do you ask them things? So we're looking at several pollutions to air, but let's start with greenhouse gases. We know that the greenhouse gas emissions have decreased in the Nordic countries over the years. This is a figure showing the emissions from Denmark, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. It shows a decreasing trend over time, but it's decreasing too slow. We know that emissions need to be down to close to zero in a couple of decades from now. And this trend is simply not making it. And hopefully the report will facilitate and accelerating this journey. Actually, the latest statistics from Statistics Sweden shows that Swedish emissions are increasing. And that's simply not good enough. So we have several recommendations, and I try to concentrate a few of them in some general recommendations. One is to sharpen existing policies. There is a need for new ones, but it sometimes can be easier to use the ones we already have. It takes time to introduce new ones. They will perhaps not be accepted. And sharpening existing ones can be to reduce emission limits further. It can be to increase reduction targets. It can be to increase an existing emission tax. And perhaps we think that we already have very high emission taxes in the Nordic countries, but that doesn't seem to be the case. If you go to OECD statistics, all Nordic countries have below average environmental taxes. So there seems to be room to increase those taxes. Use both carrots and sticks, pull and push, to increase the acceptance of the policies. We know that if we combine several policies, they can be more efficient and they can easily be accepted. This can be combining a tax with a subsidy, giving a subsidy to the ones suffering the most from the tax. It can be to combine regulations with information. We know that information as such is a fairly weak policy, but it could be necessary to use information to argue why a tax increase is necessary or to explain a new regulation. And there is a risk of leakage of jobs and emissions if one country alone is introducing strong new policies. So here we ask for Nordic cooperation. Do this together. There is no gain for the Nordic region if jobs or emissions are moving across the border to another country. But if stronger policies are introduced simultaneously in several countries, this will be probably way more efficient. Reduce the number of policies that actually increase emissions. There are policies and reforms that cause emissions. These are expensive and inefficient. We shouldn't support activities that makes it more difficult to reach environmental and climate goals. And also, they are also regressive, that is, that they help the already well off.
Can I ask a question in the middle of your presentation? Is that okay? Or?
Since we have planned this, you may.
Yeah? Perfect. I thought you weren't going to say that, but yeah, okay, this sounds really spontaneous now. All right, I'm just going to stand next to you then. Hi.
It is spontaneous.
Yeah, it's very spontaneous now. Okay, can you tell me then, so do we then actually, based on what you just said, do we actually support organizations and companies that increase our emission? Tell me about that.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was not a planned question, not a planned question at all. But you have a slide on it too, but perfect.
Unfortunately, I do. Okay, unfortunately, we have such policies. If we listen to the Swedish Climate Policy Council in a report from before the summer, they say that overall the government allocates more financial resources to reforms that hinder the achievement of climate goals than to efforts that contribute to reaching them. And one example they give is to lower the taxes on diesel and petrol. Another example could be the reduced or a planned reduction of aviation tax. And in Sweden, we have a tax deduction for commuting to work, where it's more profitable to go by car and deduct those expenses than by going by bus or even bike. That's a very those policies could be reformed, to say the least. Okay, you don't read this. Okay, so this report analyzes some 100 policies targeting emissions from consumption. Some are used in one Nordic country and not in the others. Others are not used at all, but have been discussed. Some are good. We call the best ones. Oh, no, we don't say that some are good and some are bad, but we call some are more promising than others. The bad ones, perhaps we should get rid of or at least reform. We don't need counterproductive policies. And why target consumption? Isn't it that the problem is arising in production? But we need both, of course. And there are situations that there might not be a technical solution to target production. Then it could be more efficient to target consumption instead. Could also be that targeting production in one country could lead to more production and consumption moving abroad. And we don't want that. We don't want Swedish travelers to go to Copenhagen to fly somewhere. So we need an even playing field. These policies targeting consumption, they're widely used, they've been used for a while, they're fairly well accepted, but they can be improved. And this report gives plenty of examples on how to improve them, what to introduce, and perhaps a few ones that we don't need. A few take-homes: sharpen existing policies, use carrots and sticks for acceptance, avoid leakage of emissions and jobs, cooperate between the countries, and we need fewer policies and reforms that increase the production. You find the report on this link, And thank you, Åsa.
Thank you, Marcus, so much. I'm going to ask you to, as we have planned, take a seat. Thank you. To follow up this presentation, I will also invite the first panel up on stage. I think you are sitting in the audience. I'm trying to spot you now, but perfect. Here you go. And I want to welcome up on stage, and also I'm hoping then joining me back on someone here, and Nora Sanchez-Gassen, who is from Nordregio, Katarina Axelsson, who is Senior Policy Fellow at Stockholm Environmental Institute, and Charlotte L. Jensen, who is Senior Advisor from Concito. And behind me here, Eva, I hope you can see me, is Eva Heiskanen, who is Professor at University of Helsinki. Please give them a round of applause while I move this table. Thank you so much. There you go. There you go. There we go, and there we go. Let's just see. Eva, can you hear me as well?
Yes, I can. Thank
Perfect.
you.
I
Good
should
morning,
probably not
everybody.
be looking that way. I should probably be looking that way. Perfect. First of all of you in this panel, I would like you to just give a quick reflection on the report that you just launched pretty much, and your reflection on that. I know, Eva, you have also been part of a bit of a part of the report, but maybe we should just, Nora, if you want to start.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting report, a very interesting presentation. A lot of things that overlap with our own research that we do at Nordregio. So a lot of things I think we can absolutely agree on. Maybe two perspectives just to add. We have done a project at Nordregio, and not just a green transition, where we talked to a lot of civil society organizations about this. So in a way, we've taken the other approach. You've asked experts, we've asked civil society, and there we can see some new perspectives perhaps emerging. We talked a lot with these civil society associations, for example, about the role of space and place. As one of our members in the groups said, no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And to take that into account, that if we have policies, do we need to consider space? A classical example that you also referred to is that, for example, in rural areas, we don't have the same public transport as in cities, so can we place the same demands on people who live in rural areas than as those in the cities? Iceland, it's very difficult to get away from Iceland if you don't fly. Do we need to make distinctions there? The demands and the possibilities we place on people, and you touch upon this in the report, but this is something that we have discussed a lot in our project. And then perhaps also to add that you talk about policy packages and carrots and sticks and all of these aspects. Perhaps also important to add that we should try to really build a consensus around those and make them stable. It doesn't help anyone if we have new elections and then we have radical changes in policies. That's bad for investors, it's bad for innovators, it's not good for companies and people if we constantly have to have a new playing field, have new rules to follow. So to have this, try in all our countries to build more consensus around the packages that we do implement. But overall, yes, absolutely, a great report.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nora, so much. I'll just jump and let Eva share her insights as well. Eva, if you hear, can you give some reflection on the report as well?
Yes, thanks very much, Marcus and colleagues, for the report. I'm very pleased to see it published. It is very interesting. I have been involved in a similar project indeed in Finland, and I was happy to see that we are aligned in that sense that you have a long list of measures. We also had a long list of measures. So I think this is clearly indicating that there is no silver bullet, that there will be a need for many policy instruments in order for us to reach a more sustainable level of consumption and consumption-based emissions. And what I was particularly pleased about was this notion of dismantling these policies which are actually increasing emissions, and we really need to focus on that, and I think this would be a good Nordic focus area for the future. And then indeed, I think this idea that we need some differentiated policies is also something that we might need to work on more. Is it, for example, possible to devolve responsibility to municipalities as concerns some transport, for example, policies, or even some food-related carbon policies? And would this benefit society and at the same time increase acceptance and fairness of these policy measures. So very interesting discussions starting from this report, which also includes lots of very interesting results.
Thank you so much, Eva. We'll get back to you in a minute. Katarina.
Yes, yeah, very interesting report. Thank you very much. Was very interested to read it. It supports a lot of other work that we have been doing at the Stockholm Environment Institute. We recently published a report looking at the opportunities to promote consumption-based emissions more strongly from the EU level. And as part of that work, we also talked a lot about the importance of having common targets, improve the statistics to enable a better follow-up and monitoring of consumption-based emissions. We do talk more and more about the importance of also addressing the equity perspectives of the transition. And so I was very happy to see that you discussed this as part of your report as well. And clearly the strength of doing this as collective actions is indeed very important. So very much support those findings. And I guess as the next step would be interesting to also discuss how to go from these recommendations to concrete policies and actions that while taxes and regulatory measures that you strongly sort of argue for in this report, I mean, they are indeed extremely important, but we also need to discuss how to move forward on the more softer side of the transition, working with behaviors and norms and things like that. So, but overall, a very interesting and important report.
You hear that it's a very interesting report, so you all have to read it, yeah?
I hear that.
Charlotte.
Thank you. I do also think that it was an interesting report. And in order to not maybe repeat what has already been said, I wanted to kind of stress that the report certainly seems to show, as well as a lot of other research have shown, that dealing with consumption-based emissions and forming effective policies around consumption-based emissions really do requires political courage. And it seems that courage not least has to deal with challenging the prominent commercial and lobbying forces at play. Because it seems that you found that so many interesting and exciting policies and ideas for policies already exist, but the barrier to implementing them really seems to be a lot of lobbying forces. So we need to address that as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Eva, I'm going to just fire off the first question to you. You are a professor at University of Helsinki, and I know that you've been working with policy and consumption-based emission for many, many years. Can you just quickly just give us a brief overview? Like, what have you seen developing since you started working on this? I know we can probably talk about this all day, but if you just give a short answer and overview on this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Åsa. Nice question. And yes, I tried to be brief. Yes, I have been working on this since the early 90s. So I have seen the rise of this sort of environmental product policy. And just to give you an example, in the early 90s, I had a slide or transparency actually at that time, where I had printed a study of a life cycle assessment of a sofa. And every time I showed this slide, everybody started laughing and said, well, a sofa doesn't have that's not an environmental hazard. So clearly this has changed. We now understand that every product has environmental implications, also the sofas and also the clothing and the shoes and the electronics, etc. So I think this is a good thing. And I would like to argue that the EU Eco-Design Directive, which has been recast as the Sustainable products regulation, eco-design for sustainable products regulation, has been an important milestone. We got rid of incandescent lighting, which has reduced lighting consumption since 2000 in the EU by about 25%. It might have reduced it a lot more had we not increased our number of light bulbs. So you can see very big differences in different European countries, which has to do with how much we have then consumed, how much more lighting we consume. So it is possible, nonetheless, in spite of it being a mixed success, I think it's possible to mandate more energy efficient products. And now in the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, we are also mandating more durable, repairable products, spare parts, for example, the upcoming requirements for mobile phones and tablets include durability of the product itself, the batteries, disassembly, spare parts, operating system upgrades, and non-discriminatory access for retailers. So I think this is a big thing that has happened, that we understand that we can and have to influence products, not just production, and via these products we are also, or have the possibility to change our consumer culture, as can be seen in this drive now for repairability and durability.
And Eva, can I ask you? You're based in Finland, and we're here today because to speak about Nordic collaboration as well. And for a long time, the Nordic countries have been front runners on the sustainability agenda. How do you see the Nordic countries' position today?
Very good question. And we heard already some points from Marcus about government policies that increased emissions. And we also have some government policies here in Finland that increased emissions, unfortunately. So possibly, nonetheless, it is actually fortunate that we are being overtaken by other European countries. I feel especially in this area of product policy, we are being overtaken to some extent by France, for example, which has been very active in preventing destruction of unsold consumer goods, which is now also part of the EU eco-design regulation, focus on textiles and disincentivizing fast fashion, focus on repairability, etc. So I think we need to step up our game if we want to be the leaders again.
Thank you. I'm gonna jump to you in 1 second, but because it was mentioning quite a few times about the EU, Katarina, you obviously have worked on this, and this summer you published a report at EU level on how the EU can work with consumption-based emission. What was the biggest finding on this report?
Well, first, let me say that we started this project, or we initiated this project against the sort of realization that it is so difficult for many nations, countries, and also municipalities to move forward when it comes to addressing consumption-based emissions. Many countries are sort of hesitating to put in place targets to address consumption-based emissions. So we wanted to explore the opportunities and support for starting to work on this from the EU level instead, putting pressures and providing support to countries to begin monitoring and reporting on this on a regular basis, in parallel, of course, to reports on territorial emissions. So we interviewed a number of policymakers, both at the EU level and in 3 selected case studies, Sweden, France, and Denmark. And well, in short, we found very strong support for the idea to institute consumption-based targets at the EU level, and for putting in place systems to sort of effectively monitor and follow up on these emissions. It's clear that data and standardization methods will be an issue, and this is something we need to continue to work on. But maybe one conclusion from that is to say that there will be a very long time ahead before we have the perfect data and perfect methods to follow up on this. But I want to say that it's important that we start sort of working with this now and improve as we move forward. And maybe also to add that, there are a lot of important initiatives already at the EU level, as Eva also mentioned. So there is a lot of sort of positive developments to be seen there. However, in our work, our conclusion was, though, that most of these still focus on what is often referred to weaker sustainability measures, talking or focusing on efficiency, sort of how to improve efficiency in production, for instance, rather than looking towards what is often referred to the more stronger policy measures, working to sort of better understand how we can shift consumption patterns, or ultimately perhaps also avoid some of the consumption we are sort of into today. But that there overall, we see great potential for the EU to act as a leader here, as a leader for the global level, and also for the member states in supporting them in this sort of transition. We really think that sort of working with consumption-based emissions in parallel to the territorial is really sort of high time that we start doing that now.
Thank you so much. Charlotte, you work for a green think tank based in Denmark, Concito. You mentioned already a few of also Romina, but Katarina has also mentioned that we are a bit afraid to dive into this consumption-based policy and also setting these targets. Why is this, and what is the biggest challenge with setting these targets, would you say?
It's a good question and a difficult question to answer, but I'll try, and bear with me because I have to give a fairly crude example. But at least in Denmark, historically speaking, there's been this tendency to believe in consumer sovereignty, this idea that the consumer is rational and you shouldn't interfere with the consumer's choices, and also the idea of the free market, that the market will just solve everything by itself. These are basically myths, because there is nothing, we are not rational as consumers, and the markets are not free. This is a black and white depiction of these understandings, but bear with me. Markets are already really regulated, and we are regulated as consumers and citizens, mostly in aspects such as health and safety, but not really when it comes to climate change. And that's really weird, right? We have a lot of good examples on how to help a safer society and a more healthy society, and we as consumers and citizens generally accept that. So why not kind of turn that thinking around, and then see creating policies based on consumption-based emissions, where we take responsibility for the climate impact that we have due to our consumption and way of life. Why not turn that around and see it as a possibility for actually helping us live lives that are sustainable? Because at this moment, we don't actually have the right to live sustainably. And that's really weird, right? So that's a big why, and also
I love when someone starts and then it's a little bit of a, should I or should I not? We should always, okay? Yeah, good. Yeah, perfect. It brings up the energy. This is a long day and we're going to get a lot of insights, so all cheering on is very much welcome. I had thought on behavior, but I'm going to come back to that when you said about that we're not rational, because I totally agree with that. I work with nudging in my former career, so I agree with this completely. But Nora, I know that you have also you come from Nordregio. You have also looked into this with inclusion, and you spoke about this before. Can you tell us a little bit about your Nordic toolbook? Because that's what you've done for green transition for policymakers. And what are your main findings in this toolbox?
Yeah, if I may, I'm going to answer this directly, but just to follow up on what you said, I had one thought. We did a survey as part of our project 2 years ago, so the data is already a bit dated. But we asked people 2 questions. We asked, are you worried about climate change? And 71% of the Nordic population say they are. So there is a worry, people are concerned. I mean, that comes from a lot of surveys, including ours. But we also asked them, do you think we need stricter climate policies, even if it means that we have to increase taxes? So we asked about policies, and we really tried to go in there. Would you agree, even if taxes are increased? We can see that half of the respondents in the Nordic region said yes. Another quarter was undecided. Only 1/4 outrightly said no. And I thought it was quite surprising and also quite encouraging that we often are so afraid to touch our consumption behaviors and our individual behaviors. But sometimes I wonder, are we underestimating ourselves? There seems to be quite some awareness and some willingness to place bigger demands on us. So I'd like to see that question replicated in other surveys and see if we can find the same answers. Because then I think we would have a good reason to actually be a bit more ambitious and be a bit more brave also. But to come back to your original question, on the 5th of November we will launch a toolbox for a just green transition in the Nordic region. We have, as I mentioned before, we've talked to civil society organization, not so much about how can we get the green transition done, but how can we make sure it is fair and leaves no one behind and is just. And we talked to people about what is perhaps not going so well right now, where do we have to improve, where can we be better, and we asked this question very openly. We didn't ask about consumption behaviors, but almost all focus groups brought this up. Almost all, in all groups, it was discussed. So it was something that the civil society organizations we talked to, they're very aware of this, and they're thinking about it. It was really one of the big topics. And as I said, we almost approached this question from the other side. What are the barriers right now for the consumers? What is hindering us? And based on what we heard, we came up with what can be said with sort of the 4 A's, what we should do. The results were, what we heard is we have to make green products, green services more available. We know, for example, classic example, in the rural areas, public transport is not great, right? If we want people to live greener, we have to make it available for them. We have to make it affordable for them. That starts with ecological food, sustainably produced clothing. We know it's very expensive if you want to buy an electric vehicle, if you want to renovate your home to make it more energy efficient. All of this takes money, and even with subsidies, it can be difficult for some groups to afford. So how do we deal with that? We should make green products and services and green spaces more accessible. We talked with older people with disabilities who have all sorts of challenges being part of this, simply because places are not accessible, public transport, but there might be problems with that. Digital tools are something people think a lot about. We try to save paper, more and more things are just available online, but it leaves people out who, for example, have a disability and can't use these tools, or they're old and they don't have the competence. So how do we deal with that? And then finally, especially from the youth, there came the strong message, we also have to make the green transition more appealing. We're not very good at communicating this, right? We're not very good at selling this. We always talk about the difficulties and all the things we have to give up and it's going to be so hard. But in reality, the green transition brings a lot of good things. It helps us with the climate. It will lead to a greener environment, better health outcomes, hopefully. It is great if we live in cities with fewer cars and more green spaces and more space for people. There's a lot of good things happening here. Green jobs is another one. We need to be better also to sell this and make it more appealing and not always just talk about all the difficulties that we have to face. So these were some of the findings we had.
That's perfect. Now I have 3 questions I want to ask at the same time. That's not going to work. So I think, Marcus, I'm going to start with you, but it has to do with taxes. It has to do with the rural areas that, Eva, you mentioned that. You spoke about the differences and the acceptance. So, Marcus, I'll go to you first. With regards to acceptance, would you say is there an acceptance for these policy changes? You said that there is 50% in that survey that says that if we increase taxes, it's welcome. But would you say is it for all of the population? Will people in the rural areas, for example, protest if we raise the tax on petrol, for example, or what would you say?
In general, there is acceptance for change. Change is necessary, and we also need political courage to say that we need this change. There will be losers in the transition. When we increase, if, for example, petrol and diesel prices are increasing, some will lose more than others. And if we want to increase the acceptance, we should compensate the ones losing the most vulnerable, not everyone. If we lower tax on petrol and diesel, it's very expensive. It compensates you and me, and perhaps we don't need that. And preferably, we should compensate with policies that does not increase emission, that does not lower the prices, but with other things. For example, making public transport more accessible, or something else that they want. So yes, there will be protests, and we can gain acceptance among the protesters if we give them something, and preferably we give them something that's not bad for the environment.
Perfect. Eva, you were also onto this, and you spoke to me about the different type of communications that we have to have when we create inclusive policies and differentiated policies. How should we communicate this so that everyone is on board?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question, and until now, very much the communication has been targeted at the front runners, at the people who are really in the forefront of this green transition. And for example, we have given in many countries subsidies to those people who can afford to make an investment, for example, in an electric vehicle, rather than to everybody, which we cannot do. So I think there has been a time of shaping and creating the market and making it interesting and sexy for those who can invest. But now we need to shift our communication focus. There is no inherent logic that the green transition might not be equally good for the countryside and for rural areas as it is for the cities. But it is just now the case that it seems to be due to the way we have supported middle-class people in getting things like electric vehicles, and in the way that it is presented in the media and in communications. There is also a gender aspect to this. So if we think about who will be actually doing many of these things in society, we have a rather gendered division of labor in society. So if you want an installation made in your home, if you want to repair or discuss upgrading your car, or if you repair a product, it is probably men who are doing this. So we need to get men, also middle-aged men who are working in manual occupations on board, because they are important communicators about this topic.
Perfect. Thank you, Eva, for that. I want to jump back to the behavior part of side of thing, and I wrote in my script to you guys that all should answer this. That's not going to happen. So someone can just jump on this if you want. So Charlotte, you said before about the rationality of things. I don't know. Let's do a big how many felt rational this morning? Do you make a rational decision? Up, raise your hand. Oh, there's some people that's actually raising their hands. That's perfect. So the rest of you, about 95%, not so rational. So thinking about this, when it comes to policy, there's been a lot of talk, behavioral architecture, behavioral design, behavioral insight, behavioral science, when talking about implementing that into policy, meaning that we actually create policies based on what we actually think and do, maybe not so rational. How do you see that coming into these type of policies? Charlie.
I think it's important to understand and acknowledge that behavior is very much contextualized and situated in a lot of infrastructures. They can be material infrastructures, institutional, social norms. So we need to really address what is enabling our behavior and consumption patterns more than we need to target you and me as an individual consumer, because we don't really have the action, the space for action individually. Of course, we have agency. No one is pushing us up the flight stairs, right? But we are not always able to make decisions or kind of make the green decision completely by ourselves. We need to target the infrastructures around us.
I know, Katarina, we are running a bit out of time, but I'm going to adjust the schedule. So for the people who have the next session, don't worry. You have been involved. Like I think a lot of the time, I think people maybe in this room as well have heard that we need to make it easy to make the right decision, and for us to make this transition happening, you've been involved in something called Konsumtionskompassen in Swedish, like the compass for sustainability or consumption, maybe I should say. And it's helping municipalities to estimate consumption-based emission at postcode or zip code and income level. Can you just tell me, like, how has that been helpful, or how has that been received?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. Yeah, no, I'm happy to say that it has been very well received, and it's very encouraging to find that there is a large share of the municipalities in Sweden, as I think across the whole Nordic region, that are very engaged in this topic and wants to take action. They realize that they have a large power of authority to facilitate and support households' transition to more sustainable consumption behaviors, and that they use the tools data to help them, or they input the tools data into current strategies and use it to formulate targets to work towards. And the tool helps them identify hotspots and inform action at the local level. And as part of this work, we have also found that it's quite effective to work at the local level to make this question context specific, because a lot of it is context specific. And it's also interesting to note that this has also been broadly picked up in local media. So the fact that we present consumption-based data at the local and even postcode level has generated a lot of interest, especially among local media, and who has, over the last 2 years, written very insightful and engaging about this topic, sort of contributing to this important discussion and sort of clearly demonstrating that they are also a very important actor in this transition, and that we all need to join forces. It's not only about policymakers or households, but also other actors out there, such as the media and the culture sector, for instance.
And we will have a session on culture later on in the program, which is very good. I'm coming to an end to these questions. I'm going to have just a couple of more here. But you spoke about municipalities now. Like, you spoke in your presentation about countries and like maybe the difficulties or the risk. What are the risks if we apply different rules amongst the Nordic countries? Do you see? You spoke about cross-border trade, etc.
Yeah, and I say that would be the risk in this context, that we increase the tax in one country and consumers go across the border to shop in the neighboring country, or we move productions. We lose both jobs, and we actually increase emissions since we increase travel. So if policies were coordinated and strengthened, that would be the best. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that did answer my question. Final questions to the two of you, Nora and Charlotte. So Nora first, like, what would you say? Like, what have you seen? What would be the biggest hurdles? What would stand in the way for the green transition?
Oh, a few things. One thing we haven't talked about here is, or touched upon, reskilling. Romina talked about it this morning. If we really want to get the transition done, we need to change a lot of things in our industries, in our society. We need the skills for that. So we need to give people the opportunity to upskill, reskill regularly in their work life. We have to be much better at that. Also invest much more money on this and offer the right courses, both to give people a chance to be part of this, but also, of course, for the industries. We won't get anything done if we don't have people with the right skills. We have to be better, for example, at assessing impacts of policies. We do like to do financial assessments. Perhaps we do some economic assessment or think about the labor market, maybe. But we have to be much better also to look at how are different groups affected, different communities across space. These are just some of the topics we picked up on. There's quite a few things that we have to work with, but again, I have to stress that I think in our projects, sort of from all sides, from the survey, from the focus group, the spirit we got is that there's a lot of engagement, a lot of interest, a lot of concern. So we really have something we can work with here.
Thank you for that. And Charlotte, finally, I think we are, hopefully, we're all aware in this room that we do need to lower our global citizens' climate footprint. All of us, we all need to make changes. What do you see as the main actions for doing this?
Well, there are lots of things that we need to do very quickly, but one thing I want to stress, which does require a little bit of time and effort, is that we really need to facilitate some democratic processes where we deliberate what we actually would like to have from a sustainable society, much as what you were talking about. What does a sustainable, nice society look like? We actually don't know. We think it's all doom but it's not necessarily. And looking at climate-oriented citizen assemblies where citizens are actually allowed and invited to have deliberation with knowledge partners, lots of different stakeholders, discussing what is needed, they come up with some really excellent recommendations that are really progressive. So we see that having a democratic deliberation where we talk about what we need, which is not the same as desires, we can talk about how to facilitate. We need to feel a sense of belonging. We need nourishment. We need shelter. We need a lot of stuff. It doesn't have to be the way that we do it today. We can find better ways.
Well, that's beautiful. Well, I love how you're engaged here. Thank you so much. And in fact, later on today, we will actually all experience, I'm not going to give it away how that's going to be done, but we will look into the future a little bit and maybe see how a future what a sustainable future can look like in the future. Does anybody, I'm just going to ask Eva as well, because obviously it's not as easy to wave your hand if you're behind my back. If you have any final words before we conclude.
Thanks. I think Charlotte said it so beautifully that I will not add. I will just say that well said, and I totally agree.
With that said, I want to thank Marcus for launching this report and obviously giving a great, excellent presentation. Eva in Finland, Nora, Katarina, Charlotte for giving us all these insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.